The wood shavings on the floor had gone cold by the time Rowan Holt noticed the light outside had changed. He had been sitting at his workbench since before sunrise, shaping the leg of a small horse from a block of pale cedar. He did not use machines. He used his hands and a curved knife, and a patience that most people on Haveth Station had long stopped understanding. His fingers were thick and scarred from 40 years of this work, and they moved slowly now, but they still moved true. The furnace behind him ticked as it cooled. He had let the fire drop too low again. He pushed back his stool across the workshop and added 2 logs from the stack beside the door. The warmth came back quickly. The workshop was small, and Rowan had built it that way on purpose. Small spaces held heat. Small spaces felt like somewhere. He pulled on his coat and his boots and opened the door to bring in the next crate of cedar from outside. The snow had come in the night. It covered the path, the fence post, the low roof of the storage shed, and the shape of something small that was pressed against the base of the fence post with its wings folded flat. Rowan stood still. He was not a man who startled easily. Haveth Station sat at the edge of a systems corridor, and strange things passed through. He had seen Vreth traders in the market square and Dunhari cargo loaders on the landing pads. The galaxy had been wide open for 60 years now, and Rowan was old enough to have watched it happen. But he had never seen something like this curled against his fence post. She was small, that was the first thing. She was no bigger than a child of 7 or 8, and she was folded in on herself the way a cold animal folds, all limbs drawn tight, trying to hold whatever warmth was left. Her scales were a pale silver blue, the color of winter clouds just before snow. Her wings were pressed against her back and sides like a cloak that was not helping. Her eyes were closed. He crossed the yard in 5 steps. He crouched down beside her and put 2 fingers against the side of her neck, where the scales were thinner. She was breathing, barely. He looked at the colony wall behind her, at the closed gate, at the empty road beyond. No ship nearby. No one walking past. Just this small creature, alone in the cold, with frost forming at the edges of her wings. Rowan picked her up. She was heavier than she looked. He carried her inside with both arms, kicked the door shut behind him, and set her down on the wide cot near the furnace that he sometimes slept on when he worked too late. He pulled the heavy blanket up over her and then stood back and looked at her in the light of the workshop. She was a Vreth child. He was almost certain of it. He had seen pictures in the transit bulletins the colony office sent out every few months. The Vreth were a dragon-class species from a system 3 relays out. They ran warm, physically, but young ones had not fully developed their internal heat. They needed warmth from outside until their bodies learned to make it themselves, which meant she could have died out there in another hour. He opened the furnace wide and fed it 2 more logs and then put the kettle on the small iron plate beside it. He did not call the colony office yet. He did not call Warden Ossel. He looked at the child on the cot and decided that the first thing she needed was not paperwork. The first thing she needed was to stop being cold. It took a long time. He sat on his stool and carved slowly and let the room get warm and waited. She moved first. A small shift, a tightening of the wings, a sound that was not quite a word and not quite a growl. Then one eye opened. It was a deep amber color, like a coal that had not finished burning, and it fixed on him immediately. Rowan did not move. The eye watched him. The other eye opened. She pulled herself up against the wall behind the cot very slowly, keeping the blanket between her and him, and made a low sound in her chest. He set down his carving knife on the bench where she could see him put it down. Then he got up, went to the stove, poured warm broth from the pot he always kept going, and set the mug on the floor between them. Not handed to her, set on the floor. Then he went back to his stool and picked up the carving again. He did not look at her directly, he just worked. The workshop was quiet except for the sound of the knife and the tick of the furnace. After a long time he heard movement. He heard the soft scrape of claws on the floor. He heard the mug being lifted. He kept carving. When he finally looked up, the mug was empty and she had pulled the blanket all the way around herself and was sitting on the edge of the cot watching him with both amber eyes, still suspicious, but no longer afraid. He said, "Good, now stay warm." She did not answer, but she did not move away either. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the furnace burned steady, and the workshop smelled of cedar and warm broth, and for the first time in a long while, Rowan did not feel like the only living thing in the room. Word did not travel fast in Haveth Station, but it traveled far enough. By the second morning, Warden Ossel was at the workshop door. Rowan heard the knock and did not hurry. He was at the bench, working on the small cedar horse again, and Scylla was sitting on the floor near the furnace with a half-finished wooden bird in her lap, turning it over in her claws very carefully. She had found it on the second shelf the evening before. She had not asked if she could take it. She had just taken it and sat down and begun to study it the way a child studies something she finds wonderful but does not yet have words to say so. Rowan had let her keep it. He opened the door. Ossel stood in the cold with two colony officers behind him. Ossel was a broad man with a flat face and the kind of careful eyes that came from years of watching people for things they were not saying. He was not cruel. Rowan had known him for 11 years and understood that about him clearly. "Holt," Ossel said, "we need to talk about what you have inside." "She has a name," Rowan said, "Scylla." Ossel looked past him into the workshop. Rowan did not step aside. After a moment, Ossel looked back at him. "She is a Vreth minor, unregistered arrival. That makes her an administrative matter. She needs to go to the holding bay until the transit office sorts out where she came from." Rowan said, "The holding bay has no heat source above 12 degrees. She will be dead before anyone sorts anything out." Ossel blinked. "We can bring portable units." "Portable units take 6 hours to stabilize a room in this cold. She is a young Vreth. She needs sustained heat. She is not going to the holding bay." There was a pause. One of the officers behind Ossel shifted his weight. The other looked somewhere else. "You cannot just keep her," Ossel said. "I am keeping her," Rowan said, "until someone comes to take her properly, with appropriate preparation." He said this the way he said most things, quietly and without emotion, as if the matter were already settled and they were all just waiting for Ossel to agree. Ossel rubbed the back of his neck. "I have to report this upward." "Report it," Rowan said. "I will be here." He closed the door. He heard them talking outside for a few minutes, low voices he did not try to hear. Then the sound of boots on packed snow going away. Scylla had not moved from the floor. She was watching the door with both amber eyes, very still. "It is fine," Rowan told her. He sat back down at his bench. "They are gone." She watched the door for another minute. Then she looked down at the wooden bird again. Consul Dara called on the comm unit at midday. She was a thin woman with the kind of exhaustion on her face that came not from one bad day but from a long string of them. She apologized 4 times in the first 2 minutes. The story came out fast. Scylla had been listed as cargo in transit on a Vreth diplomatic transfer. The ship had departed on a rescheduled window. No one had physically confirmed the manifest. No one had walked the hold. No one had checked. A child had been left behind like a forgotten parcel. "A retrieval delegation is being arranged," Dara said. "It may be 3 to 4 days. The Vreth ambassador is being informed. He is not pleased." "I expect not," Rowan said. "In the meantime, Mr. Holt, officially the child cannot remain in a private residence without formal." "She is staying here," Rowan said. "I have a furnace. I have food she can eat. I have room. If the colony wants to provide something better, I will listen. If not, she stays here." Dara looked at him through the screen for a moment. She had the expression of someone who had prepared an argument and was now deciding it was not worth it. "I will note that you have taken on a temporary care responsibility," she said. "Unofficial, of course." "Note whatever you like," Rowan said. She ended the call. He looked across the workshop. Scylla was still on the floor, still holding the wooden bird, but now she was not just studying it. She was trying to move its wings gently, testing where the joints were, figuring out how it was made. She looked up and found him watching. For a moment neither of them moved. Then she held the bird up toward him, wings open in her small clawed hands, as if she was showing him something he had not noticed before. He looked at the bird he had carved 3 months ago and never finished and never sold. He looked at her holding it with such careful attention. He got up, crossed the room, and sat down on the floor a few feet away from her. He held out his hand. She set the bird in his palm. He turned it slowly and showed her where the joint was at the wing base, how the peg fit into the slot, how if you turned it just right the wing could move without breaking the wood. She watched with the kind of focus that children bring to things that matter to them. He handed it back. She tried the joint herself. The wing moved. She made a sound he had not heard from her before. Low and warm, something between a hum and a purr. He did not know what it meant exactly. But it did not sound like fear, and for now that was enough. On the third day, Scylla tried to help him carve and nearly took off the tip of her own claw. Rowan moved fast for an old man. He caught her hand before she pressed down again, turned it palm up, and looked at the thin line of dark violet that had appeared along the inside of her smallest claw. Not deep, more of a scrape than a cut, but she made a sharp sound and pulled her hand back and stared at it with something between offense and surprise, as if her own body had betrayed her. He went to the shelf, found the small tin of salve he kept for his own cuts and brought it back. He held it out. She looked at it. She looked at him. He pointed at the scrape. She held out her hand. He put a small amount of salve on the side of his thumb and pressed it gently along the scrape. The salve was made for human skin, but the cut was minor, and it did not matter. She watched his face the whole time with those amber eyes, as if she was trying to understand something about him that had nothing to do with the salve. He let go of her hand. She looked at the small shine of it on her claw. Then she pointed at the piece of wood she had been trying to cut and looked at him again. "Tomorrow," he said, "I will show you the right way." She did not look entirely satisfied, but she sat back and picked up the wooden bird instead and went back to studying it. That was how the days in the workshop went. They had no shared language at first, not really. Scylla knew some standard words, learned from the few days near the Vreth delegation before the mix-up. Her vocabulary was small and scattered. She knew the words for eat, warm, wear, and the names of a few objects. She did not yet have words for most of what she wanted to say. So she used other things. She pointed. She drew shapes in the sawdust on the floor. She made sounds that carried feeling even when Rowan could not parse them as language. And Rowan, who had spent 40 years learning to read what children needed before they could say it, understood more than she expected. He learned she was afraid of the dark on the first night, when the power flickered during a wind storm, and she made a sound that was not a growl and not a cry but somewhere between the two, and pressed herself into the corner behind the furnace. He fixed the lamp first and asked questions second. He learned she loved anything that spun. He had a small wooden top on the shelf, painted red and yellow, made years ago. When he set it spinning on the workbench, she went completely still and watched it until it fell over. Then she looked at him with an expression that was unmistakably a request. He spun it again. He learned she was mourning something, not from anything she said. He learned it from the way she sometimes stopped in the middle of doing something and went very quiet, looking at nothing, her scales losing a little of their brightness for a minute before she came back. He recognized that kind of quiet. He had lived in it himself for 15 years. He did not ask about it. He just kept the furnace burning and let her come back in her own time. He showed her how to carve properly. He gave her a soft block of practice wood and a blunt tool so she would not cut herself again. She had small claws already shaped for precise work, and she understood the grain of the wood faster than most adults did. She did not have the patience yet to work slowly, but the instinct was there. On the fourth evening, he was finishing the cedar horse. She had been watching for an hour. He set it on the bench in front of her. "Done," he said. She picked it up and turned it in the light. She ran one claw tip along the curve of its neck, very gently, and then looked at him. "You make things so they last," she said in standard, each word placed carefully like she had been preparing the sentence. He looked at her. She set the horse down with both hands as if it was worth something. To him, every piece was worth something, not in money, in the fact that it was made well and would hold. "Yes," he said, "that is the idea." She nodded slowly, the way someone nods when a thing they suspected turns out to be true. Outside, the Galactic Union comm had been updating every few hours. Ambassador Khan had confirmed departure from the secondary relay. Arrival at Havith Station was now less than 2 days away. Rowan looked at the comm. He looked at Scylla, who had settled near the furnace with the wooden bird in her lap, humming the low, warm sound she made when she was at ease. He turned back to his bench and started a new piece. A small shape, roughed out from memory. He already knew what it would be. He did not say it out loud. He just started carving, and the workshop stayed warm, and the night outside went quiet and deep, and neither of them needed to fill it with words. The Vreth ship did not land at the main pad. It came down in the open field east of the colony wall, and the snow it displaced in its descent swirled up in a white cloud that stopped people in the street to watch. The hull was dark and smooth, and had the look of something built to impress rather than just to travel. It was not a large ship, but it carried itself like one. Consul Dara was at the field with Warden Ossel and 2 officers and a translation unit, and a thermos she was gripping too tightly. She had been awake since the early hours preparing for this. Ambassador Khan came down the ramp alone. He was large. Not just tall, but the kind of large that takes up space without moving. His scales were deep charcoal gray with the texture of old stone, ridges along his jaw and crown that came with age. His eyes were the color of coals still burning low. He wore a long, dark coat that moved like cloth but was probably something stronger. He did not look at Dara for the first several seconds. He looked at the colony wall. He looked at the sky. He looked at the snow the way someone looks at a thing that has personally failed them. Then he looked at Dara, and she began the formal greeting. He let her finish. Then he said in clear standard with an accent like slow gravel, "Where is my great-niece?" It was not a question. Dara pointed him toward the workshop. He walked there with the delegation staying back. Ossel started to follow, and Khan turned and looked at him once. Ossel stopped walking. Rowan heard the knock. It was different from Ossel's knock. Heavier, more deliberate, the kind of knock that was not asking. He opened the door. Khan looked at him. Rowan looked at Khan. Neither spoke. Then Khan looked past him into the workshop. Scylla was at the workbench. She was on the tall stool Rowan had moved for her, leaning over the practice wood, working slowly with the blunt tool. Her tongue was pressed between her teeth in concentration. Wood shavings were scattered around her. She was humming. She had not heard the door. Rowan stepped aside without a word. Khan came in. He stood in the middle of the room and looked at his great-niece and did not move. His face did not change, but something in how he held himself shifted, very slightly, the way a structure settles when it finally takes weight it has been waiting to take. Scylla looked up. She saw him and went completely still. Then she was off the stool and across the room and had both arms around his middle, her face pressed into his coat, making a sound that was not language at all, just pure feeling, loud and then quieter, and then just a steady vibration in her chest. Khan put one large hand on the back of her head and closed his eyes. Rowan went and stood near the furnace and looked at the fire. After a long time, Khan spoke to her in Vreth, low and slow. She answered rapidly, pointing at the bench. The furnace, the shelf with the spinning top, and then at Rowan. She talked for a long time. Khan listened without interrupting. Then he crossed to Rowan with Scylla, still holding his hand. "She tells me you found her in the snow," he said. "That you carried her inside. That you refused to give her to the cold room. That you fed her and kept her warm and taught her how to make things with wood." Rowan said, "She is a child." Khan looked at him for a long moment. It was the look of someone carefully revising what they thought they already knew. "Among the Vreth," he said, "the one who keeps another's young from dying enters into something we call Vrath Cell. Your language has no single word for it. It sits between a debt and a kinship. It cannot be paid off. It becomes part of the family record." "I did not do it for a bond," Rowan said. "I know," Khan said. "That is precisely why it holds." Scylla had been quiet through all of this. Now she reached behind her to the bench and picked up the wooden bird, the one she had been carrying since the first night. She held it up to Khan with both hands. "He made it," she said carefully in Standard, "so it would last." Khan looked at the bird for a moment. Then he looked at Rowan. "I owe you more than I can say in this language," he said. Rowan said, "Stay the night. She needs rest before she travels." It was said the way Rowan said things, flat and practical, as if it were simply the sensible next step. But Khan heard what was underneath it and gave a slow nod. Outside, Consul Dara was still in the field with her thermos and her prepared remarks. None of the remarks would be needed. Inside, Scylla climbed back onto her stool, picked up the blunt tool, and went back to the wood, humming the same low sound she always made when she was at ease and not thinking about anything that hurt. The furnace burned steady. The workshop smelled of cedar and warm air. For a moment before anyone spoke again, it was simply a room where several living things had found a reason to be still. Khan sent the delegation back to the ship and stayed. He sat in the workshop's second chair, which Rowan had cleared of unfinished pieces to make room. It was not built for someone Khan's size, but he sat in it without complaint, coat still on, watching the furnace fire with the stillness of someone who had learned over many years how to wait without wasting it. Scylla had fallen asleep on the cot. She had lasted through supper and most of the evening, moving between Khan and Rowan as if she needed both in sight at once. But the warmth and the food and several days of slow recovery finally pulled her under. She was curled small on the blanket, scales bright in the firelight, the wooden bird pressed against her chest with one claw. Rowan poured 2 cups of the strong dark tea he kept in the tin above the stove. He set one near Khan's chair without asking. Khan picked it up, looked at it, and drank. They sat for a while without speaking. This did not feel uncomfortable to either of them. Then Khan said, "She told me she was not afraid while she was here." "She was afraid the first night," Rowan said. "The lights went out in the storm, but she settled after." "She is not easy to settle." Khan looked at the cot. "She has not settled well since her parents died, 8 months ago, a transit accident, small by the galaxy's measure." He stopped, the fire ticked. "Not small by ours," he said. Rowan looked at his tea. He turned the cup in his hands. "She has been with my household since then," Khan continued. "She eats, she is polite, she does what is asked of her, but she had stopped making sound. The humming she does, those sounds a child makes when she is at ease and thinking of nothing bad. She had gone quiet." He paused. "When I walked through your door, I heard her humming before I saw her." Rowan said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "My daughter died 15 years ago. She was 22. Shuttle malfunction, 2 systems over." He set the cup down. "I made things for a while without knowing why I was still making them. Then a girl from the East Quarter came to the door one winter asking if I had anything for her little brother who was sick and could not go outside. I gave her a painted horse." He looked at the shelf across the room where finished pieces waited. "I have been making things for other people's children ever since." Khan was quiet for a long time. "That is a very human thing to do," he said at last, not as criticism, as something he was turning over carefully. Maybe, Rowan said, or maybe it is just what you do when you have hands and grief and enough wood. Khan made a sound low in his chest that might have been agreement. The wind outside had dropped. The night was very still. Somewhere in the workshop the top shelf creaked the way it always did when the temperature shifted, and neither of them startled at it. After a while, Khan reached into his coat and brought out a small stone. It was smooth and dark, about the size of a large coin, with an old shape carved into its face. He set it on the bench between them. "This is a Vreth family token," he said. "It is given between households that are bound, not allies in the political sense, something closer, extended kin." He looked at Rowan. "I am entering you in the ledger. You will not fully understand what that means yet, but it means you have standing to ask for anything the Vreth consulate can provide, and it means Scylla may name you in her own household record when she is old enough to keep one." Rowan looked at the stone for a long moment. "I carried a cold child in from the snow," he said. "I did not do it to be owed anything." "I know," Khan said. "That is the fourth time you have said something like that. We understand each other." Something had changed in his voice. The formal weight of the ambassador had gone. He sounded like what he was underneath the title, which was an old creature who had been frightened for something small and precious, and was now sitting near a warm fire watching her sleep. Rowan picked up the stone. It was heavier than it looked. He turned it once and put it in his coat pocket. "Thank you," he said. Khan nodded. In the morning, Consul Dara came with the transfer documentation. She was efficient and careful, and did not make eye contact with Khan more than necessary. Khan signed everything required and gave a formal statement about the colony's handling of the situation that was just warm enough to read as a compliment. Warden Ossel appeared in the doorway after she left, looked at no one in particular and said, "The holding bay pipes froze overnight. Good thing she was not in there." Then he left without waiting for a response. Scylla was at the workbench carefully packing the wooden bird into her travel bag. She wrapped it in the edge of a cloth so it would not press against anything hard. Rowan watched her and said, "You can come back, the workshop will be here." She looked up at him. "I will come back," she said, as if it were already decided and she was simply confirming a fact. He nodded. That was enough. 3 months passed the way winter passes on Haveth Station, slowly at first and then all at once. The snow pulled back from the paths. The sky went from white to gray to something almost blue. The cedar Rowan had stored through the cold months dried well, and he had more good material to work with than he had in years. He made a wheeled cart for a boy in the East Quarter. He made a set of painted animals for the new family that had arrived on the last transport, 2 parents and 4 children who had come with almost nothing, and looked at the toys like they were made of something rare. He worked, he kept the furnace going, he drank his tea. A short message came through the Vreth consulate frequency 6 weeks after the ship left. It was written in standard and had clearly taken some effort. It said that Scylla was well, that she was eating, that she had started humming again at home, which her great-uncle had noted formally in a household report, a detail that made Rowan sit quietly for a moment before he read the rest. It said she was learning to carve from a Vreth craftworker in Khan's household, and that the craftworker had complained she was too impatient with the slow parts. Rowan read that line twice and almost smiled. He wrote back. He kept it short. He said he was glad she was well. He said impatience with the slow parts was not necessarily a flaw, only something to be worked on. He said the workshop was here. He sent it and went back to work. On a gray afternoon in what passed for early spring, a Vreth diplomatic shuttle came down at the landing field with no announcement and no scheduled arrival on the colony board. It was small. The delegation that came off it was also small, only 2 attendants and 1 child. Scylla came down the ramp in a traveling cloak that was slightly too long for her. She was carrying something wrapped in cloth held against her chest with both arms. She saw Rowan standing at the edge of the field. She stopped. He raised one hand. She crossed the field at a pace that was not quite running but close enough that the two attendants had to move faster to keep up with her. She stopped in front of him and looked up and did not say anything for a moment. Her scales were the same pale silver blue, bright in the thin spring light. "You came," he said. "I said I would," she answered. She held out the thing she had been carrying. He took it and unwrapped it carefully. It was a carved figure, small, roughly shaped, made from a pale wood he did not recognize. It showed a person sitting at a workbench, bent slightly forward in the posture of someone concentrating. The proportions were not perfect. The bench was a little lopsided. One of the figure's hands was larger than the other, but the posture was right. The angle of the head was right. It was unmistakably someone who was making something and meant it. He turned it over in his hands. "I made it," Scylla said. "The craftworker helped me with the joints, but I did the shape myself." She paused. "I made it so it would last." He looked at the figure for a long time. He thought about the cedar horse on his shelf. He thought about the painted animals he had given away over the years to children whose names he sometimes forgot, but whose faces he did not. He thought about the wooden bird she had carried off the first night, and how carefully she had packed it in her bag. He thought about what it meant that she had spent 3 months making this with her clumsy young claws, and brought it back across several relay points, just to hand it to him in a field. "It is very good," he said. She looked at him with the careful eyes of a child, who is not sure if she is being told the truth or being managed. "It is honestly good," he said. "The posture is right, that is the hard part." Her scales brightened slightly. She looked down at the figure in his hands and then back up at him. "Can I see the shop?" she asked. "Yes," he said. They walked back through the colony gate together, the child with the silver-blue scales and the old man with the scarred hands, while the two attendants followed at a respectful distance, and the thin spring sun came through the clouds and made the wet ground shine. Inside, the furnace was still going. The workshop smelled of cedar and old wood and warm air. Scylla pulled off her cloak and looked around at everything with the focus of someone checking that things are where they were left. The spinning top was still on the shelf. She looked at it. Rowan picked it up and set it spinning on the bench without being asked. She watched it turn, very still, until it fell. Then she looked at him and sat down on her stool and pulled a piece of practice wood toward her. "Show me the slow part again," she said. He sat down across from her and picked up a tool and did. The galaxy was full of councils and treaties and turning points that historians would argue over for a long time. None of that happened here. Here, an old man taught a small dragon how to be patient with the wood, and outside, for the first time in months, it was not snowing.